Good afternoon. We are here. My name is Elizabeth Geltman. I am a professor at the Cooney School of Public Health, where I teach environmental and occupational health sciences. I am here to moderate the panel on fracking with my two authors, Seamus McGraw and Tom Wilbur. We're going to start the afternoon with my giving a brief overview of fracking and defining terms. Then each author is going to give their discussion of it, and we're going to hopefully open it up for questions. When we have questions, we're going to ask that everybody come up to the microphone here in the center. So if you think you have a question, you probably want to go and get set up before the question and answer period so that we can do it quickly. First slide. Okay, these are the books. Let me go to the second slide. I'm sorry. So I want to start off by defining what is meant by fracking. The term is short for hydraulic fracturing, which is a technical term used by the oil and gas industry for shale gas extraction. It's also, fracking can be spelled with a C. It's also, the term is high volume hydraulic fracturing, or HVHF, which is really what we're going to be talking to this afternoon. Next slide, please. So the thing that's important when we're talking about fracking is that there's often a very important disconnect between what industry is saying and what is expected and understood in the popular press and the public. So when industry says there aren't any accidents attributed to fracking, they're talking about a very small portion of the shale gas extraction process. When the public and most journalists talk about fracking, they're talking about the entire shale gas extraction process. So it's important to understand this distinction. Sometimes people are saying things that are technically true, but are misleading in the context because there's a disconnect between the language. Next slide. So this is what the shale gas extraction process looks like. And this is from a US EPA study that is studying the impacts on water. Shale gas has and the impact here has a multitude of processes. Basically what they do is they start off by having a very large amount of water that is going to be used in order to pump water into the ground through a hole that is drilled in the ground in order to try to open up shale gas that is caught in shale rock. Now, it's mostly water that goes into this. But there is a portion of it, industry says it's about 0.5%, which is composed of sand and other types of chemicals. Those chemicals have multitude of purposes. The main purpose is to have what's called a slickant and an emulsion. And so what it does is it allows the water to be pumped in and to have sand be emulsified inside it so that when the water goes through, it can take advantage of fractures that are currently in the earth, and the sand will wedge those open and hold it open so that when they pull the water out of the ground, the methane gas will flow back out of the hole. So what happens here is you've got a number of issues. First of all, a lot of water is being used, usually between 1 million and 5 million gallons. It's fresh water, so there is, in many places, particularly on the West Coast and more recently on the East Coast, a problem of allocation of water and how much water is being used and dropping the aquifer. The second issue is that you're mixing chemicals in the ground. The chemicals go into the ground. Some of them stay there, and some of them come back up. The upward portion is called flowback water. When the water comes back up, in addition to having the chemicals that were mixed in there, there's also things that were in the ground that combine with it. Some of that is radioactive material, which is called naturally occurring radioactive material, and other types of salts and brines. So the water that comes up is actually more concentrated and has a higher concentration of total dissolved solvents than what went into the ground. And then finally, they have to figure out what to do with this flowback or produced water. The water is usually stored on the premises, sometimes in retention ponds, more recently in different types of tankers. Industry is trying to reduce the amount of fresh water that's being used, and so now they are quite often trying to recycling it. Recycling it is good because we use less water, but it creates more concentrated brines and more concentrated produced waters, which are sitting on various types of properties and are subject to different types of spills for accidents and weather events and the like. And the last portion is disposal. We have to figure out what to do with all of this produced water that has chemicals and has naturally occurring radioactive materials in it. Okay? So that's sort of the process things. And the difference is that when industry is talking about fracking, They're talking about the portion where they're shooting water in the ground and trying to break up the rock. When the public and most journalists are talking about fracking, they're talking about the entire shale gas extraction process, which is the technical name. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is to show you how much shale gas reserves there are around the country and in the world. And if you look at the slide on the left, it shows the United States. The areas in pink are all areas that have been identified as shale gas reserves. The area on the right is the Marcellus Shale and the Utica Shale. The thing about that is not only is it quite large, if you notice it, it's also quite close to where a predominance of gas users are, which make it enormously, potentially economically advantageous. The slide on the right shows where shale gas basins are worldwide. Most of the shale gas is being produced right now in the United States. It is spreading worldwide, and so the question of water issues and the questions of environmental and ecological issues are something that are going to be an international problem and are becoming more so in terms of demonstrations as we move on. Next slide, please. So this is showing the drilling activity, and what you'll notice here, the slide on the left is showing drilling activity at the various shales throughout the United States. The yellow line is showing the Marcellus Shale, and what you'll see there is in 2006 there was almost no wells, and currently we have the highest producing number of wells in the Marcellus Shale in the United States above everything else. The second slide shows the movement from importing and exporting of natural gas. Up until a few years ago, the United States was an importer of natural gas. It came primarily from Canada. Currently, we import almost no gas from Canada. We are in the process of moving from an importer to an exporter, and the projections from the US EIA show that we are going to be a major exporter if we continue on this trend. Next slide. So the question comes down to regulation and where we are, and is it a Wild West situation? The United States has very, very little federal regulation in terms of shale gas. A lot of the statutes have been exempted either because of the Energy Policy Act of 2005, which exempted the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. The oil and gas industry was exempted from the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act regulations. Historically, there was a lot of exemptions for the petroleum industry before, so we don't have a lot of federal oversight going on. Most of the activity is happening at the state level, and the states vary enormously as to what can and can't be done. So in my neck of the woods, the difference is in New York State, where we have a moratorium. Nobody can do any kind of these drillings right now. And in Pennsylvania, where we have a lot of drilling going on, and it's increasing exponentially. Next slide. Okay, so the last slide is what I'm going, I don't think you can see that very well, I apologize, is going and naming various public health and environmental concerns. And they come in a lot of areas. One of the things, water obviously is an exceedingly important question, and to the extent to which these are, shale gas extraction has the ability to contaminate both groundwater surfaces and groundwater aquifers, as well as freshwater sources. The extraction process has issues when there's spill. It is not, it's quite possible, and has happened quite often, that there have been incidences of freshwater contamination. Because we have a groundwater contamination, it's drilling through the aquifer, we have issues of groundwater. So with that, there's other issues with air and soil and other things as well, but I'm going to turn it over to Tom Wilbur, who is a journalist and wrote this Under the Surface, and he's going to take from now. Next slide.
Thank you, Liz, and thanks for that great overview of the technical aspects. I'm going to give you a brief overview of my perspective as a reporter. I worked for the Press and Sun Bulletin, that's a Gannett paper, in upstate New York, Binghamton, New York. I worked there for several decades, covering health and environmental stories, as well as sometimes overlapping into agricultural issues. The greater Binghamton area, Broome County, is largely a rural area in upstate New York, so agricultural issues are important. And natural gas development for a long, long time in New York State was not much of a story at all. There has been some conventional development in western parts of the state, but it's a very small part of the economy. And people wouldn't get too excited about it, their newspaper readers at least, unless there was infrastructure, a pipeline occasionally going